Studies show that by 2025, more than half the world's population will live in megacities of 10 million people or more. Can we design cities that allow us to protect wildlife and natural resources, limiting impact on ages-old ecosystems, while also preserving our historical heritage? So we hope that we can gain from lessons learned elsewhere while sharing our own knowledge as we all, together, manage this new great era of human development.
Very much to Leilani. Lots of important points there. Of course, the very valid point of those living in informal settlements being rights holders as opposed to so wrongly and often being stereotyped as criminals or other. And also the crucial point of security of tenure, which we'll come on to in a little bit, and how indeed you own land or property, or in many cases for people living in informal settlements, don't have the proof or the documents to prove that you even own property or land. So to discuss these issues further, I'm delighted to welcome on the stage our panel. If I could invite Washington and Samsuk to join me on stage. We have Washington Farjado, who's the Urban Planning Secretary for the Municipality of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you so much for making the trip. And we have as well Ms. Samsuk Bunyabansha, who's Secretary General for the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Ms. Freda Prempe, who is Minister of State and Ministry of Works and Housing for the Government of the Republic of Ghana, who will be joining us virtually. So thank you very much to her for making the time as well. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to head straight into a roughly 20-minute discussion. Oh, hi, Freda. How are you?
Hello.
Yes, hello. Can you hear us all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thank you. Freda, we'll start. I was just telling our audience that we're going to start with a 20-minute discussion between the three of us, and I know that you'll be showing us a short PowerPoint, and we'll then take about 10 minutes of questions from you, the audience. So if you're in the room, please hold your question for then. And if you're joining us online, please just do submit a question and we'll try to get to it. Washington, if I could start with you, actually. Okay. I would love to hear from you how you think the coronavirus pandemic in particular is one of the many challenges that slums and informal settlements face. How COVID has affected the lives of vulnerable communities in slums and informal settlements, from your experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of today's program. Would have wished to join you in Dubai. I bring you compliments from my ministry, the Ministry of Works and Housing. And COVID-19 has affected each one of us, not only our people living in the slum areas, but they are the worst affected. Because wherever they live, as I speak with you, they have problems with sanitary conditions. That's where they have their economic activities. They are prone to all sorts of other activities. They don't even feed well. And in the era of COVID-19, we have to boost your immune system. We have to adhere to the COVID protocols. These people are not even wearing masks. They are not adhering to the social distancing. They are not feeding well. The economic situation has also come down because of COVID-19. So back home in Ghana, it's a very serious situation for us. And the government of Ghana has put in structures and measures to support these vulnerable groups of people by way of supporting them economically, by way of supporting them with physical cash on their MTN mobile phones to support them, by way of a lot of education. And I must say that NGOs back home in Ghana are doing fantastic in this area. The Ghana Health Service is also doing fantastic in this area. All of us, each one of us is on board. So the COVID-19 You know, people living in slums, they don't have enough resources. They don't have facilities that some of us have in terms of sanitation, in terms of hospitals, in terms of schools, in terms of economic activities. So it's a difficult situation for them, and they don't even, some of them don't even understand the whole scenario, and they think that COVID-19 doesn't even exist because they are not getting it. Surprisingly, majority of people who are getting infected are not coming from the slums. And sometimes it baffles me. And I've been asking my health friends, my doctors, that what actually is keeping these people? And some of them told me, one, because they don't live in a cold area like we do have in the US or in some parts of the world. They're always in the sun. They're always walking back and forth, doing brisk business and all that. And sometimes to those in the rural communities, the kind of food that they eat also supports somehow their immune system. So, but those who are living in the urban slum areas, it's a difficult situation. Looking at the sanitary conditions, looking at the environment, looking at the climate system, it's only God that is holding them up. But so far, we've not had any serious infection around these areas. And we are still, advising and advocating that they take the vaccine. We are actually taking the vaccine to that environment. We are using the primary health care facilities in all the municipalities. And people have understood that it's better for you to get vaccinated. So the education, the advocacy is also going on well. But just that the economic situation, the environment within which they find themselves in, it's a serious thing that we all have to talk about. But the government has been very supportive in this era of COVID and in this area, making sure that no one is left behind, making sure that the vulnerable groups of people are also catered for. So the education is ongoing, but you can't help it. You have about 3, 4, 5 people living in a kiosk or living in a container or living in an insanitary condition. So there's nothing like distancing amongst them. There's nothing like social distancing. They don't even understand. They don't even care. So it's a difficult situation, but I believe with a lot of education and a lot of advocacy, we'll be able to get these people on board.
Thank you so much, Freda. A lot to kind of take from what you've said here. Of course, the challenges exacerbated by COVID. And I want to come back to some of those points in a minute. I believe you also wanted to show us a PowerPoint shortly, so we'll come to that in a bit. I just wanted to hear, Washington, how that compares with your experience on the ground in Rio, with how kind of COVID has affected the lives of communities living in slums. And just as a side note to the logistics team, if there's any way to have the timer on one of the screens, just so I can make sure we're not running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Just to start my role in the City Hall in the beginning of this year, but I think we'd like to address this issue in the looking to the whole country and specifically how favelas dwellers were able to deal with the COVID pandemic. It's as you can think about it, it's not possible to avoid to do a working from home from favelas, and favelas dwellers they have also to take the public transportation. So during the pandemic, it was really critical to see how the governments couldn't really pay attention to these grassroots problems, but at the same time, it was fantastic to see how communities could thrive over the COVID, building collaboratory networks and especially even building from the scratch impressive logistics systems for food distribution and also for supporting women's and families with basic income. And so it's really interesting to see how those communities were able to, in the very short time, building up very creative systems to deal with the pandemic, and somehow giving a really important lesson to governments, if governments could listen to them. In the case of Paraisópolis in São Paulo, for one example, they create a solution called President of the Street, which is a fantastic name. It's also, there's a really harsh irony in this kind of name. It means that one person in that street in the favelas was able to taking care of their neighbors. And every day they have to check each door and knocking the doors and asking if you are feeling well. And then from this bottom-up perspective, building a participatory census for the COVID in the community. One other really fantastic innovation from favelas in the case of Rio was building a communication systems like it's happening in the Complexo do Alemão with a broadcast system called Voz da Comunidade, that was a community voice that was also able to providing news from the side of the favela to the media outlets that most of the time have any kind of comprehension of what is going on inside of the favelas.
I really like what you say about, the kind of communications and collaboration networks that people spontaneously start to put together, sometimes not even waiting for government intervention. And that echoes, of course, the point that Leilani made as well, and the kind of lessons we can learn in terms of innovation from people living in slums and informal settlements. Samsuk, if I could come to you, you were telling me earlier that, everything at the heart of what you do is people, and how do we hear from people on the ground as opposed to designing these kind of top-down approaches. Can you talk us a little bit through how you have, both with stakeholders, but also ensure that those voices from communities on the ground have been captured in the upgrading process in Thailand?
Thank you. Well, I think these last mile problems happen because we planner or government think from the supply side what it should be good for the people. And then when we develop, the last mile disappear somewhere. The people whom are poor are not the part of the program or being that part properly. Or we do one project here, one project, they're so scattered. But the scale of the problem is so big. Huh? So it's nothing to do with the solution. Huh? So what I think is so important that we have to rethink, we have to redo, we have to change the focus. Instead of putting the supply side as the usual process, we should focus on the people. They're waiting for you for a long time. If you go to any city, you go to Nairobi, you see this slum there waiting to be solved. No? So every city, we have the people who have problem in the informal settlement. Why don't we start from there? Start from where they are, or even the renter, whoever. Huh? And trying to see how different solutions from the existing group could be. You either reblock it, you reconstruct the whole thing, you chip a little bit, you make it into a higher building, tall building, low-rise, high-rise, whatever. I mean, the design is not a big problem. But whether the design or the housing option, housing solution is fit the people or not, that's the point. Huh? And not only the kind of the physical design, but their life, their system, and so on. So the key point for this meeting, which I think is so important, how we change this approach to be more people-driven. Look at people as solution, not problems. I used to have the upgrading project. One is the old slum, which is very dirty, which is problematic. And another one we reconstruct to the reblocking. And it looked nice with colors and so on. And then we show to the people, what's the difference? The upgraded one look very nice. Is it look like slum? No. But I said, this is the same group of people who stay as a slum before. And then with the support of finance, this and that, and they change their own slum into a proper housing. So slum is not in the people. Slum is in the system. The system is a slum. Huh? Okay, so if we have that approach and we look at people as solution and doer, and the sort of the possible actor to make change, we need to start where they are and what will be the support system for the people, and do it at scale. Huh? Do it at scale, which is a citywide, not just a few projects here and there, but the whole city. You change the solution from project approach into a system approach, being a part of the city, and how the city would make a 3-year plan, 5-year plan, and see how the different slums, which become an active actor, doing a survey for themselves, trying to start the saving, the finance system, how to make it work, how to learn, how to do, how to network, and this and that. Give a lot of work to the people so they become an active actor and start moving, huh? You know? And at the city scale, we get together with the different actors, the city, the school teacher, the church, the whatever. If you want to multiply slum upgrading, housing solution for the poor, you have to multiply mechanism. It's a very unrealistic when we have slum upgrading office or ministry, this and that, no? And a few people make decisions here and there. No, you got to multiply mechanism. Multiply mechanism, number one is that people on the ground are active actors. Number two, so many actors at the city level become active. And then the third one is we have to build the tools. The tools is financial system. There's no finance. Today, no housing finance on the ground. So we have to find a way how the finance system of the people are working and what are the support from the upper layer so the finance system could be more friendly to each other between the people system and the upper system. So this is something we have to do, the land, the participatory planning, yeah, and many others. If this tool is softened and developed in such a way to allow the people in a big scale to be an actor, you can solve in a big way, yeah.
Thank you so much, Samsuk. I love what you said earlier about, the process is the slum, not the people. The people are the solution, and we should probably get that printed on a T-shirt. I have another question for Freda, but as we're fast running out of time, I just first want to make sure if there are any from the audience, either in the room, and if so, please just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you, or online. And if there are any online, I'm sure the team will bring the iPad over to the stage. Do you have any questions from the audience to begin with? If not, I've got plenty for our panel. I'll give you a few minutes to think then. And Freda, if I could just come back to you, and I wanted to compare your experience to what we've just heard from Samsuk in Washington. I mean, as a high-level government official, how have you gone about capturing the voices of the residents living in slums and informal settlements and ensuring that their voices are incorporated in policy making?
Before I go to that, let me go back to the COVID situation. I think I heard one of the panel members talking about transportation, because once the vulnerable groups of people live in slums and they live within their own environments, the probability of them, contracting the disease is very slim. But once they commute from one place to the other, it becomes another issue. So transportation is a factor. I also want to bring to bear that during the COVID-19, initially the first quarter of 2020 and slightly second quarter of the 2020, we had some total lockdown in some parts of the country and some partial lockdown in some parts of the country, depending on the situation on hand. And as a ministry, we at the time, the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, in collaboration with the National Disaster Management Organization and faith-based organization, for that matter, Ministry of Finance and government as a whole, delivered a lot of food packs to these groups of people. And we also delivered raw food to these groups of people because we didn't want them to come to the cities to buy food or to look for food for their children. So we made constant food supply to them. At that time, I was a deputy minister at the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, and I was in charge of one of the regions of Ghana, the Greater Kumasi, and together with the municipal assemblies and the faith-based organization, we supplied food and other medical items to these groups of people. I also share the same sentiments with my other panel member who talked about structures. The slum is not in the people, it's in the structures that we put down. I think I share the same sentiments with them. But the point is, so many factors pull or push people to the urban cities. We are looking at population growth, we are looking at urbanization, we are looking at the push and pull factors. The push factors, you cannot help it, because in terms of disasters and all that, you'll be forced to move from one place to the other. By looking at the pull factors, depending on going to seek for greener pastures, looking for a job, securing another job somewhere, so many things push people from one place to the other. But if you have structures in the area where the person lives, let me take my constituency, for instance. If you have resilient, safe accommodation, safe housing, you have health facilities, you have education, for educational facilities, you have the communities economically viable, and people will not move. Some will move, but some will also be content with the situation they find themselves in. So if you really want to bridge the gap, we are looking at affordable housing for these groups of people. We are looking at slum development, slum upgrading and all that. But we should be looking at the cause of why people move from one place to the other. What can be done at that lower level? What can be done at that community to ensure that the person, if it's not in terms of job, if it's not in terms of transfer, if it's not in terms of posting, why would he want to come or move from Bian Kwanta to Accra or to Kumasi? So looking at the structures is very important. But once they come, that's where they feed, that's where they find they find a place to put their heads, whether in kiosks or in containers or whatever. As a government, we cannot sit back and look at these groups of people. They are even in the majority. Once one person moves from one place to the other, he finds a place somewhere. The next time around, you see another person joining him or her. The next time around, then the whole community, the whole family moves in and they start giving birth. So I think that we have to, back home in Ghana, we have to enforce our bylaws to ensure that some of these people are not given the opportunity to stay where they are. Secondly, once you see them springing up, you have to put a stop to it. Thirdly, what can the person do to enable him or her stay back at home? During the COVID, I mentioned government's financial support to these groups of people. Monies were sent directly to their mobile phones. They were able to access food and other food from other sources. A lot of people supported the government's call to support the vulnerable. So I think that research has also told us
just forgive me for interrupting. I can just see on the timer we have a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure I haven't forgotten any questions from the audience.
So what I'm saying that I share the same sentiments with them. Just that back home in Ghana, we also distributed some food items to the vulnerable groups of people. And the last speaker talked about structures. I think that's the way to go now, because you cannot rule out slum development and slum bringing up. You know, a lot of people, certain circumstances push them or pull them to move from one place to the other. So if you have all these factors within the community where he or she lives, I think it will be better for us than always talking about slum development and slum upgrading. We should be looking at social housing.
I note what you've... Thank you. I note what you've said as well in terms of push and pull factors, which I think is really important, making sure that, you know, the solutions are attractive to people, that they do have jobs and they do have available transport solutions. I just want to check quickly in the audience. We have time for one question or two, if there are any. If so, please just raise your hand. Yes, just over there. If we could get a mic to you. And if you don't mind, if you feel comfortable doing so, quickly giving your name and who you work for.
Hi,
Thank you.
My name is Gretel Cuevas. I'm from Mexico. I'm a Watson Fellow doing a journalism project around the world. So something that really surprised me is the phrase that you mentioned, that people are not the slum, like the system is a slum. And I think that something very important is how the narratives around poverty and the narratives about slums. So how important is changing the narrative in the way we refer to the poor, in the way we talk about poverty, to actually develop policy solutions that not only that actually reflect in real people's lives. So I just want to know the panel's perspective on
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Washington, actually, if I could get you to answer that one super quickly, because we've just come to the end of our time, but basically in kind of brief, any kind of successes or lessons in terms of changing that narrative around slums and how we kind of change those stereotypes?
Yeah, my main concern is about the next pandemic, because in the rate of growth of informal settlements in the whole planet, also in Brazil or in Rio, what kind of tools we have and what kind of information, what kind of data we need to really establish a more, from the biological point of view, a more health condition to those settlements. So during the pandemic, it was very clear for me that we need to face the digital divide in favelas. It's something that we don't talk about it, but especially once again during the COVID, it was fascinating to see how inhabitants of favelas, how they use the digital tools to express their voice and also to build a national network to distribute support to those places.
And just, if I may, on this point specifically, I mean, is this something you have come across in your experience, the kind of marginalization or stereotypes and hurtful narratives around poor people or people living in informal settlements? Is that something you're concerned about?
Yes, but I think it's also something beyond the urban stigma. It's really how to giving access to people in their place, to giving them access to digital solutions to not only express their voice, not only express their personas, but also to being able to find solutions. And from the government side, we have a really good data and mapping for favelas, but it's not possible to cover all aspects. We don't have precise and accurate information about the quality of the inequalities of the housings. We don't understand the quality of the ventilation or insulation in favelas. So what kind of tools we need to really avoid the same kind of problems that we have in this pandemic in favelas or in slums? And I think it's something that I'm working right now on that, using LiDAR scanning from a bottom-up perspective and try to attract young people to do that in order to build up a big data for favela to really make possible not only for the government side, but also for the community side to really find collaborative solutions to avoid the next pandemic.
Thank you. I think you raised also yes, just 30 seconds because we're running out.
I work with slum in Thailand, in Asia, all over. I can tell you that people in the slum community, they're okay. They're fine. But the system are too clumsy to reach them and allow them the possibility to change. And this is what we have to address. People are ready. And people in the modern world, they want to change. They want to be a part of the larger society. They want to be legal. They want their children to be proper. So the immense urge of the people are there. Now, how do we invent the tools and the possibility in which we open up this opportunity and make people go ahead? Go ahead and make change in a big scale as much as possible.
I think I see a common thread in what all three of you have said is that the goodwill on the ground is there and people very often are at the source of that change themselves. But how do we give them the tools? Washington, you mentioned digital tools, which is a really interesting point, and facilitate that change with them. I'm so sorry to have to bring the panel to an end. I think we could go on.
Certainly allow me to give my closing remarks on the panel discussion, just in 30 seconds.
Yes, just 30 seconds, please.
Yes, I believe that the pandemic has also enabled all of us to identify certain gaps in our health delivery system, educational system, and also the inequalities in the system as well. It's about time we look at how to improve on the conditions of people living in the slum area. So I believe that 3 issues have come up, and I think we have to be discussing it. One is empowerment. That's where he finds herself. That's where the family is. How do we empower them? The other one is about advocacy and education. The other one is about how to provide basic amenities to improve their livelihoods. So I believe that if you're not able to upgrade, if you're not able to move them from one place to the other, and that's where, like my colleague from Thailand said, they are happy. That's where they find themselves. So we have to improve the basic sanitary conditions within the specific, or the enclave where they live. So I believe that improvement of the living conditions is important, and trying to bridge the gap in the health delivery system, educational system, economic system is also important. Advocacy and empowerment, and also the provision of basic amenities where they find themselves.
Yes, no, that absolutely good points to all 3 of you. Thank you so much to Freda and for being so patient with us online. I know it's always tricky to have a hybrid of these panels, but I think you made it work pretty well. And thank you also very much to Washington and to Samsuk. We will have Samsuk actually back on the stage later, so we'll come back to this great concept of processes being the slums, not people. In the meantime, I'd like to hand back to Kennedy, who's going to invite Samewaba on the stage to share a few reflections on the past session. But for now, thank you so much to our panel, and please give them a round of applause.
Next, we have a remote intervention. I understand that colleagues need to put up a slide. We have Tiparat Nopaladorom, I apologize if I haven't got the name right, who is an advisor on Community Organizations Development Institute, CODI, in the Government of the Kingdom of Thailand. Are we ready to go on that one? Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, yeah.
We can hear you. Excellent. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, for the invitation to share Thailand experience on the citywide slum upgrading. We have this since 2003. This is the National Quality Housing Program and implemented by CODI, which is the public organization to solve the housing problem of the country for the citizen. But it's not just only to solve the housing problem. Actually, the aim is to empower community organization. The right now, in line with the SDG and also the NUA Habitat 3, the government of Thailand already approved the 20-year strategy for housing development plan, and the citywide slum upgrading by CODI is also one of the main strategy to solve the problem of the urban poor and also the rural housing. In order to meet the objective that all Thais have secure housing with good quality of life in year 2036, housing for all. The thing is that why we have this program, the Thailand Citywide Slum Upgrading, is the problem of that how the community can have the secure housing. And as Somsuk said in the earlier session, that under this program, the people are the core actor. The people are the solution, they are not the problem. And the slum community will be at the center of all kinds of process of development. And networking and collaboration is also the key elements. The area to tackle is that how to make finance as a development tool, how to make the finance as visible and accessible for the people and also affordable by the people. The program was supported by the government in terms of the policy and also got some government subsidies. We can see here the slide that we have the government subsidy. Right now it's about $3,000 per household. This is for the upgrading of infrastructure, for the local management and some for the housing improvement. But the main part is from the people themselves. It's the housing loan that get from CODI revolving fund. The way that we support is to community as a group or as a collective housing, so not to individuals. And then the committee will manage with the member. So once the committee have the plan, they propose to CODI, and then they can get the revolving the fund from CODI for the development. The system in every city, because now we work in 300 cities in Thailand, cover all across the country, and the thing that made it possible is that how we can support every city to work at the same time, to work of their own, create the platform where the communities and all the agency in relevant agency can work together, so they can have the platform to make the survey, to know, to understand what is the problem of their what their city, how many slums they have, and then come up with the development plan and find the various solution for all community in the city. In this way, we can scaling up to tackle with the problem of the slum and squatter, because every city can have their own platform that they can work together. And CODI will support this and also provide some technical assistance, provide some financial support. So this is the example. I will go really quick because the time is too short. Just to show you that the people is the core actor, so how they participate, work together in order to plan for their community, and support with the professional like architect, engineer, and to work with the people. And then they can come up with different solution for their own community. For example, they can have the on-site upgrading, on-site reconstruction, land sharing, and then improve the housing, relocation, buy new land. Or this is also the example. This is for the squatter along the canal, and this is the canal side development and by people, by the communities. And the housing that by people is also affordable, because in the survey, they not just only survey that how many slums they have, but they will survey all the affordable of the housing that how they can have of the community. This approach is very different from the conventional one, is that the urban poor community organization and their network are the key actor. And this is the demand driven, as Kun Sung-suk said this morning, to implement all the improvement projects. And it's not just only the physical upgrade, but this is also change the social structure and then the managerial system, and build the confidence to the people, create the sense of belonging of the people, because it's the people that who make it. Because CODI will channel all the subsidy from the government and loan to the people in order that they can manage of their own for the development, build a new community. This also build the new partnership, and also this community become the part of partnership in the development process of the city, and also is proof that the secure tenure is negotiated. And when we look at the input from the government subsidy is just about $2,500 in the past. Now it's the $3,000. But the people pay more, invest more. So this the government just the total investment from the government is less than 30%. And the bigger one is from people, is more than 70%. So this is not just the cost, but it's the investment, and is for the country. And when the people invest in this, is also stimulate the economy of the country. And the impact from this is that we can build a new and secure housing, and it's go beyond housing. We can have the affordable housing for the urban poorest. And it's the collective way, that collective management that build the people capacity, empower the people, collective land ownership. At the same time, because we request the people before that they can get any loan from CODI, that they have to organize the community saving and fund. The reason is that to bring the people to join hands together, to plan together and to manage together. And it can act like the community bank to do all other things, other development thing, rather than just only housing, welfare activities, scholarship for children, youth, elder disadvantaged, and it's also the collective management that empower the community. And also build the active link with the community network and also the city organization. And the really important thing is that we can have the active citizens, that the people, not just only the problem as many other people think, but they can become the active citizens and link with the local authority, do things together. When we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, we have the people doesn't wait for the government just to help or any agency. But the community network, they help and support and sharing to fight with the COVID-19. It goes beyond housing. From their community fund, the saving, they can have the food security. So these are the example. So the community kitchen, they change from the affected people to problem solver. And they also change for the receiver to givers, and change from crisis to opportunity. So we can see here that the food sharing, the food exchange between network, between community, the community, the collective community plantation, every space that they have, in order that they can have the food security in the time of the pandemic. Community, this is the community farming and plantation. Alcohol sharing, mask sharing, health protection, community cleaning, or even community isolation center. So we can see that once we empower the community organization from housing, and it's go beyond that, it's build a resilient community. And also this is the way that the people have more confidence to deal with all the change. So this is just to share the experience in Thailand. And now we work in 300 cities and cover more than 100,000 households. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiparat. I mean, again, highlighting some of those extremely important elements that you have to operate at the scale of the city, but still look for the varied texture that each city has and how you can respond to that. And then the fact that it isn't just about housing, it's how housing fits into the whole social dynamic of a community. Finally, we have Same Waba, who is Global Director for Urban Disaster Risk Management, Resilience and Land Global Practice at the World Bank, where often, you know, myself and others, we often see bank and think money, but it's also a source of massive experience and a leadership in terms of putting out the examples of what can be done. So, Same, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robert, and good afternoon to all. Maybe a couple of thoughts on the last mile and going to scale, using some of the experiences of programs and projects that the World Bank has supported. So we have invested extensively in slum upgrading in many of the countries that we've worked with. We've stumbled across the same problems, which is how do we resolve the land tenure challenge and how do we go to scale. And I think along the way we've learned a few lessons. The first is it's not enough to solve the problem of slums if one does not solve the problem of housing, because then one will always be going after the slums, fixing the slums yet again and again and again. So then really to be able to accomplish something of scale, one requires to intervene both on the slum upgrading front, what you call the curative, fixing living conditions where people are living, combining it with the preventive, which is basically an affordable housing strategy that avails access to affordable housing, access to land, so that, if you will, the flow, which is, you know, future household formation, people who are moving into cities can actually settle into alternatives and do not, you know, go and look to the slums. One of the countries where we have done this type of a program, and again it goes back to government leadership, is Indonesia. Indonesia, we've traditionally invested in slum upgrading since the 1970s, a very famous program called the Kampung Improvement Program, where we have been investing in improving living conditions in the informal settlements over there called kampungs, and then continue to scale up this work, doing work on community development, economic development, alongside the work on the physical upgrading of the infrastructure. And then in the past 5 years, we've coupled it up with a housing program, an affordable housing program that offers two types of support to families to acquire or improve their housing. So one is housing improvement loans, allowing people who live in units that require either, an expansion for livability or a retrofitting for resilience against disasters, cyclones, extreme weather events, etc., to be able to borrow and to do the improvement. It's basically a variant on your typical way of building housing, which is the incremental housing approach. When families do not have access to finance, they basically save gradually, and as they save gradually, they acquire building materials, build a house slowly. So this is a way of transforming this type of an approach. The second one is an upfront subsidy that goes to the household, coupled up with an access to a mortgage loan. So you call them a credit-linked subsidy that enables the household to acquire a housing unit on the market. So then being able to do those two programs together at scale is one way of tackling the problem and one way to get to that extra mile. The country that has done that to the largest scale possible on its own was Brazil during the period between 2007, 2008 till 2015, 16, which is the combination of My House, My Life, Minha Casa, Minha Vida, and the slum upgrading program under their growth acceleration program. A second lesson that we've learned that is really important is obviously the obvious one we've been talking about the whole day today, which is the need to involve the communities. And I think some of the most impactful work that we have managed to do was when we worked with community groups on the ground. So in particular, the example I mentioned earlier, which is us working with Slum Dwellers International, SDI, and the Slum or Shack Dwellers Federation on the ground to be able to develop a participatory planning approach that prioritizes the investments of the community, bring these into the planning process so that when you're availing the support for slum upgrading, these could be taken into account. Now, the one thing that we still haven't brought into a slum upgrading model, but I think is worth in investigating, is to find a way to create an incentive system for local government to scale up their action. So we do have a line of programs called the Program for Results, where we finance the system of intergovernmental fiscal transfers from national government to local government. These funds are transferred both on the basis of poverty headcount, population headcount, etc. So an objective formula that gives them a base of funding. And then you add on top of it a performance top-off that requires the local government to achieve certain policy objectives. In the project that we've done in Mozambique, that one of the dimensions of this performance top-off is the regularization of titling for slum dwellers. So every additional title that's issued, again, you leave to local government the ways to implement on their own, you put a top-off and you allow the local government to access additional funding. The great thing about this type of an approach, the performance reward, is that obviously it creates the right incentives for the right behaviors. The challenge with it is it can be, a winner takes it all thing, so you need to invest into capacity building, because obviously the lower the municipalities with less capacity that are not equipped from the get-go, if you're not helping them to acquire that capacity, might lose in the race of the performance to those that have the better capacity. So these are maybe three different examples covering three different sets of issues.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, we have a few minutes, I believe. I've got rather confused by the clock, but that may be because I'm a lawyer and we're not very good at counting. But I think we still have a few minutes. So any immediate questions for anybody on the panel that you would like to raise? We've had some fairly big issues put on the table. You shouldn't be shy. Okay, let me see what I can conjure up from my notes and things. I'm just thinking, in the case of Accra, what are some of the key measures that actually at a practical level that the local government has been able to put in place, and then how do you measure the direct impact of that in terms of households affected or in terms of social infrastructure, or how do you look at, there are examples you can give from there?
Well, thank you very much. Over the years, because of our political development after independence, the first government was socialist oriented. So it had the programs and activities to intervene through support. Unfortunately, when the government was overthrown, others which came did not follow the plans that were developed earlier on. And lands that the natives allocated for housing improvement were undertaken, but the houses went to other people, especially the elite. So that also created distrust among the indigenous community and the government. So any attempt to make any intervention, the people accepted it with some skepticism. So that also created challenges for such interventions until the city authority decided to face the challenges head-on by creating an agency so as to focus on development in the indigenous areas to whip up their interest in any government intervention. Otherwise, mistrust between the people and the national government created a challenge, said that any interventions were resisted because people felt that it was a ploy to deprive them of their heritage. And that had been the challenge. But over the years, through community mobilization and sensitization, the people are now accepting such public and national interventions in the community. Much as their lands are gone, the place that is left for them, they want to protect it because of their heritage. And housing in Gamashi does not belong to one person. It belongs to the whole family. And with the UNESCO proviso that we should have in situ development instead of clearing the community, which is a cultural heritage. I'm sitting here, I have a family, I have my own house. But anything that I have to do in terms of the rites of passage, from marriage, outdooring, naming of my children will have to take place in my household, my original family house. So once you clear one house, then you will raise the family, because there's nowhere or no place where the family can come and congregate. And that has been the resistance that over the years we have to confront, because the people are skeptical about government intervention, thinking that the lands will be taken from them, because it's right in the city. And if once the land is taken from them, then they lose their heritage. So that's the challenge we have faced over the years.
Thank you for that. Anybody tempted yet? No? Tipperat, if I could ask you mentioned government subsidies as a key part of the equation, not as the dominant cost. But I'm wondering, is that what you would identify as the most important public investment in Thailand, or is there another key area where you think public sector should be trying to focus on?
That is also very important that to have the policy support. So in terms of the subsidy that is can support the people to start to work together. So for the housing development, they can see with they can invest with their affordability. And another issue is that there's still some issue that the government should invest more. It's like the land for the people. Because land is also the critical issue in Thailand, especially in the urban area where land is quite expensive. So the public land, the land is belong to the government, is also one thing that the government should support, and also some regulation that is maybe obsolete or is out of date. It should be improved in order to support the work for the people, and also the to build every city to have more capacity. So this is also another area that is very important too.
Thank you. I've finally got people appearing at the back, just as I'm even more out of time again, but please, and organisers, throw something at me if I'm really out of time.
My question is to you, Dr. Sameh. You mentioned the success of the project in Indonesia, but in Indonesia, the program is national, and sometimes we see that the relation between national governments and local authorities is not very easy to manage. From your very huge experience, and you see many projects all around the world, in your opinion, if you have an advice to give us, what should we do? Directly with the local authority, or it has to go through a national program?
I think there's two dimensions to this answer. One has to do with our own projects, because we are a development finance institution that provides loans to countries, these loans need to be repaid back. They need a sovereign guarantee from the Ministry of Finance. So naturally, on our types of projects, we need to start with the national government. I mean, local government institutions can definitely take lots of initiative, but access to funds from multilateral development institutions without sovereign guarantee is much more the exception than the rule. So this is an inevitability that we start from. And I hear you totally that there are, quite the instances, especially that you come across the mayor of the capital city is starting to become much more of a high-profile, public figure, and therefore, it's, whether from the opposition or in, as perceived as a threat by national government in terms of, if you will, succession planning. So this situation happens a lot. But the thing about slum upgrading programs is, there are ways of making them, first, run a national program like that. You can ring fence it and create metrics for implementation that are very objective. For instance, a distribution of the funds between the municipalities as a function of the percentage of the population that lives in slums. So something like the city of Sao Paulo had done a system like that called HABISP. It's a slum upgrading system where they've basically compiled the information on slums, the geographic information, the human development indicators, the prevalence of risk, disaster risk, etc., to create a very objective, composite indicator about the vulnerability of slums that allows you then, if you will, to distribute the funds in a very objective way. And the point at the time was, we don't want politicians to interfere, and this is my constituency. And so even, within the city, you get lots of, challenges. Case of Pakistan is a very well-known case where, every election is an expansion to the Kachi Abadis and to the identification of those that will receive some support as part of the vote garnering thing. So I think there's a national, local dimension, but even within local, there are quite a lot of challenges. And I think the best way to ring fence that is to find really objective criteria that condition the distribution of funds and, to think about rewarding, if you will, performance for those municipalities that achieve the policy objectives. Not sure I answered the question, but I took it to a different direction.
It worked superbly. I'm being flashed somewhere between time up and 1 minute left. And in the spirit of inclusion, there is a young lady at the back asking for the floor, so I think we ought to have gender equality in the questions from the floor. So please go ahead. And that will then be our last.
My name is Joanna. I'm a sustainable interior designer. So I have a question about when working on the development of these slums and urban habitats, when do you work with local designers and architects and contractors to develop them, or do you outsource them? And if you outsource them, do you then go back to the communities and try to train and develop local talent, or how is it done? Thank you.
Do you have somebody in particular you want to direct that to?
No, just general.
Okay, I would, if any of the panel want to sort of put their hand up and vote for that, Same, and then please. But let's be as concise as we can so we try and give the floor.
So usually in slum upgrading program, if you will, the design content tends to be limited because you've got the part about regularizing land tenure, that's policy. You've got the part about the infrastructure design, the road width, etc. And that's quite a bit of negotiation between the urban planners and the community so that you don't displace people. So probably the subsets where you find yourself designing something are the public interventions, like public facilities, a health center, a small-scale school, etc., and maybe the resettlement housing that allows you to resettle, the minimum percentage of the population that you need to displace to open up a road or something like that. Usually within these types of interventions, you try to work in a participatory way with the communities to ensure, just like you do from an urban planning and design perspective, you do a charrette with the community to define their elements, and then you help support that. Now, whether it goes to, you tend to work, yes, with local designers, but it's not a design-heavy intervention. Now, this said, there are many examples where design has transformed places. The Favela Bairro in Brazil, with the work of Jauregui and others, where again, very surgical interventions really help transform the built environment out there.
Just very quickly.
Thank you. In the case of Gamashi, we train the youth so we could capacitate them through skill transfer so they can make interventions themselves. For instance, the community center in Gamashi that we have now, we train the youth and they made the interventions themselves. And then working with private contractors, we create job opportunities for them also so they could earn some income through the interventions that we did. So that is the practice that we had in Gamashi. He said that after the implementation, they can have other opportunities in other areas outside of the community in terms of alley paving, micro roof production for intervention in the future housing activity that we want to engage in. So the youth will readily be available to get jobs and then improve their economy.
Thank you. And Tiparat, I can see you wanted the floor just to close.
Yes, thank you. In our case, it belongs to the committee, but at the same time, we support the technical support. For example, we link with the academic to work with the community or the community architect, planner to work with them. But the choice is the people. They may build the house themselves, they may do the community development themselves, or they can hire the contractor. It belongs to the community. It's all the decision is from the community. And I add a little bit about your first question is that anything that is more important, just not rather if we can develop more, like every city can have the development fund for the city. So they can manage, they can decide together, community and the city. So this is the way that to empower the city and also can scaling up the capacity in order to cope with the problem. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Ana Claudia, who will be far more practical than I and talk about how we will actually get all of this stuff done. Thank you very much to all of the panelists. I really appreciate the time and the comments and the knowledge that you've shared with us. Thank you to the audience too.
Thank you.